So this fella here is a silver scat, and a silver scat is a brackish water fish. So it can live in full fresh, brackish, and full salt water. And you got to be very careful of its dorsal spines, because if you look carefully on the top of this fish, it actually has big poisonous spines. And with any fish, if you ever got spined by it, you just got to put the wherever you got spined into hot water, and make sure the water's so hot that you no longer are worried about the fact you got spined, and then the hot water will break down any neurotoxin. The other thing to be aware of with this fish is it is a skinned fish, not a scaled fish. So therefore you do have to watch it with things like white spot, and do be careful when medicating a tank with a skinned fish, even though I have found these fish to be quite tough. The best thing to do if this fish is ever sick is just up the salt. Salt seems to fix everything with these fish. And these fish can be quite aggressive, particularly to each other. And do watch them with other fish, because they can get nippy. So sometimes you get ones that behave themselves very well, and then you get others that might misbehave a little bit. And they're a very gluttonous fish, and they like a lot of greens in their diet. And forget about keeping them with live plants. They'll decimate your live plants. And they're a very large growing fish, so you really want to make sure that you've got lots of room if you're going to go for this fella. And be careful keeping them together, because you either want a group of them or just one, because you can find that they do become a little bit aggressive, particularly to each other. Now this fella here is a Tinfoil Bob. A Tinfoil Bob is an absolutely beautiful species of fish. They do grow very fast. So you really want to be keeping these fish in a nice tank where they've got plenty of room. They're a very social sort of mid-dwelling fish. So they're a very good fish to have with rock dwellers or fish that sort of don't want to come out. And they are a little bit flighty, so you do sort of have to watch them with the rocks, because they're pretty good at like crashing into rocks and freaking out a little bit. Sometimes they even freak out and go upside down and all sorts of stuff when they get startled when you turn the light on or something. But all in all, they're a real classic fish, and they love to eat, and they really grow. And they come in a few different varieties. You can get long fin varieties, you get albino varieties, and then there is a couple of different species of tinfoil. One grows bigger than the other one. I think the ones with the black in the top fin like this one do grow bigger. But a very social, very beautiful fish. So this monster is a Texas. Texas is a very hardy cichlid, and they can handle quite cold water. I've had a few customers keep them in temperate water environment, not that I'm encouraging that. But they do grow to be an absolutely beautiful, and this is a gorgeous specimen. Really beautiful color on him. They're a little bit grumpy, but tend to pretty much keep to themselves. You got to pair them up because they're a substrate spawning fish. They can be a little bit fussy picking their mates, but then once you've got a good pair, they'll barricade out some territory and try to breed. But as a one-off display fish like this fella, just absolutely beautiful. Look at the colour in him. This guy's about as good as it gets. So this guy is an Oscar. Now an Oscar is one of the most classic aquarium fish. They're very fast growing, very gluttonous fish. Now they used to have a real reputation as being aggressive, but the main time they're aggressive is if you feed them live food, and if you don't keep them in a social environment. For example, if you just have 2 Oscars in a tank and they're not exposed to other fish, they do get a bit of only child syndrome, and they can be a little bit aggressive. But as you can see, when they've got room, you find they're actually a very peaceful species of fish. They rarely cause you trouble. They're awesome to breed when you see them breed. They do come in different varieties, like that one's a tiger, the behind it's a tiger. Then you've got a long fin albino and another long fin there. So they pair up. They're a beautiful fish to watch breed. But the main thing to be aware of Oscars is that they grow super fast, and they're often a very interactive fish. They're a fish that you really get to know, and they're often described as being like a dog in a fish tank. Very, very hardy, just an awesome fish. Make sure you've got a good set of lids on the tank, because often they'll throw themselves out of the water when they'll jump out trying to eat bugs and stuff. Very, very cool fish. And back in the old days, it was common to see Oscars just lay flat on their side, and they used to call it flip-flop. But in general now, we don't really see that behavior anymore, because that was the old days when we used to feed food that wasn't as good quality. And when you feed low quality foods that might be full of like mammalian products or something, and they're having trouble digesting, that might be why they flip-flop. So flip-flop is like an old thing that we don't really get anymore when you're feeding high quality foods like Danichi. The other thing is that these fish used to be prone to hole in the head disease, and we don't really get that anymore either. And that's once again due to higher quality foods. So if you're feeding these fish something like Danichi color, you won't get any of these issues that we used to think were synonymous with the Oscar. So fish keeping is basically 50% water quality and 50% nutrition. So as far as food quality is concerned, probiotics from New Life Spectrum and Danichi Color, they're my favorite foods. So this fella here wandering around in here is a 7-bar Frontosa. So 6-bar Frontosa from Burundi are much more the common ones, whereas these ones are the 7 bars from Kigoma. And a little bit of yellow through their tail. This guy needs fattening up just a tiny little bit, but he's looking really good. They're a very, very beautiful, very peaceful, pretty lazy sort of fish. And with these guys too, if you ever have trouble feeding them, they often eat at night. So if you ever find that you're having trouble getting food to them during the day, because sometimes they're just too lazy and they can't be bothered putting in much effort to eat. So you have to make everything easy for these fish, because they're very much into their own terms. So they don't tend to go out of their way for too much. Very beautiful fish from Lake Tanganyika in Africa. Now, one thing you'll notice about this aquarium is you've got fish from Australia, you've got fish from America, you've got fish from Africa, you've got a whole big mix of fellas jumped in here, and fish from Asia. And you sort of can pretty much get away with anything when your tank's big enough. So a lot of the rules that you hear, don't put this with that, this fish is going to kill that fish, pretty much everything goes out the window when your tank's big enough. So the main thing that you need to be aware of when mixing fish is the mouth rule. So if your biggest fish can swallow your smallest fish, then you have to assume that's going to happen. But in a tank this big, sometimes you can even get away with that. Then the other thing you need to be very conscious of is what they call conspecifics, which means fish that look similar to each other. So if you've got a fish that looks similar, they're the ones that are likely to fight the most. So if you have a group of a fish, it tends to work out. If you have a single of a fish, it tends to work out, depending on the fish. But when you have a tank this big, you can sort of do anything you want.